Are you ready to learn how one man, born free but sold into slavery, not only led a revolt, but forced the greatest empire in the world to remember what fear and discipline truly meant? This isn't the myth of a lone hero. This is the story of a military genius named Spartacus, and it's far more complex than it appears. Spartacus was no ordinary slave. He was a freeborn Thracian from the Balkans, a land where martial skill was valued above all else, where every man was raised as a warrior from childhood. His extraordinary military mind was the product of two inseparable influences. First, as a Thracian, he mastered irregular, quick forms of warfare, what we would today call guerrilla tactics, and he understood how to use rough, broken terrain to his advantage. Second, and even more crucial, before he became a gladiator, he likely served in the Roman auxiliary forces or else was captured and trained while a prisoner of war. In either case, he spent significant time inside the Roman military world. That meant he didn't just know how to wield a weapon or how the Roman legion fought in formation. He knew the psychology of Roman commanders, their marching routines, the weak points in their supply lines, their entire logistical machine. He understood exactly where Rome's legions were strongest, on an open plain, in disciplined formation, and where they were fatally vulnerable, strung out on a march, hemmed in by terrain, or hit by a sudden night attack. This dual knowledge, Thracian mobility combined with Roman discipline, was his deadliest weapon, the secret that made him unstoppable. In 73 BC, in the gladiatorial school at Capua, a group of fighters decided that it was better to die fighting for freedom than to amuse the Roman crowd on the sands of the arena. About 80 men, armed with crude training blades and kitchen knives, broke free. They immediately showed their strategic instincts by seizing Mount Vesuvius. The mountain gave them perfect shelter, and more importantly, canceled out Rome's advantage in numbers. A cavalry charge was pointless on such steep terrain. At first, the Romans responded with arrogance. The local Capuan guard tried to drag the runaways back and was utterly crushed, leaving their weapons on the ground. With those captured arms, the rebels finally had real swords and shields. They were no longer just escapees. They had crossed into organized armed resistance, becoming a force Rome could not afford to dismiss. Rome escalated quickly. From the capital came a praetor, an experienced magistrate with real authority and pride to match. He occupied the only viable ascent to Vesuvius, sealing the rebels in and waiting to starve them out. By Roman standards, the strategy was flawless, but Spartacus never played by the rules. Under cover of night, his men wove long rope ladders out of wild vines growing on the slopes and descended a sheer cliff the Romans hadn't even bothered to guard. At dawn, they struck straight into the Roman rear, catching the legions completely off guard. The shock was devastating. The soldiers broke, leaving behind weapons, armor, and, most importantly, supplies. This victory was not about brute strength, but about psychology and reconnaissance. Strike where the enemy least expects it, at the moment of peak overconfidence. With this, Spartacus proved that Rome's legendary legions were not untouchable, and that even a band of former slaves could make them bleed. But how did he transform a ragtag crowd of runaway slaves, gladiators, shepherds, and peasants into a fighting force able to stand against Rome itself? The answer: iron discipline and a sense of justice. In his camp, strict but fair rules kept the men united. Loot was distributed by clear binding norms, preventing jealousy and theft. Buying and selling were forbidden so that greed would not rot them from within or create fertile soil for betrayal, as so often happened in other revolts. He didn't just fight, he built. He organized mobile forges and workshops to repair armor and craft new weapons, keeping his army battle-ready. Crucially, he mixed fighters from different tribes and languages, drilling them to obey shared commands and signals. What he forged was not rabble, but a genuine army. Their cohesion came not from fiery speeches, but from food, weapons, and fair discipline, an order Rome never expected to see among slaves. With this strength, he began his astonishing campaign across Italy. When the Senate dispatched two consuls, Gellius and Lentulus, Spartacus outmaneuvered both. He never allowed them to join forces. He intercepted Lentulus on the march and crushed him before he could entrench. Then, wasting no time, He wheeled around and struck Gellius before he could regroup. Next, on his way north, he annihilated Cassius, the governor who tried to block his path to the Alps. His methods rarely changed: careful scouting, timing, hitting one isolated portion of the enemy instead of the whole mass, and withdrawing before reinforcements arrived. He turned Rome's mighty legions into lumbering giants, cutting them off from their baggage trains and striking with mobility they could not match. The Senate was humiliated. Fear spread through Rome itself, but triumph carried the seeds of defeat. Within Spartacus's army, a major split emerged. His ally Crassus commanded a large contingent of Gauls and Germans, and they argued over strategy. Spartacus wanted to push through the Alps into freedom beyond Italy, while others, hungry for plunder, wanted to stay in the rich south. Crassus's faction broke away. This division was catastrophic. Rome seized the chance, crushed Crassus's group near Mount Garganus, and slaughtered thousands. Crassus fell in battle. For Rome, this was more than just a victory. It bought them time. Time to regroup, rethink, and place one man fully in charge. That man was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest citizen of Rome and the future triumvir. He restored iron discipline to Roman troops with ruthless methods, even reviving the ancient practice of decimation, executing every 10th man in units that showed cowardice. Then, he changed Rome's strategy. He refused to chase shadows through Italy. Instead, at the toe of the peninsula in Calabria, he built a colossal wall of earthworks, deep trenches, high ramparts, palisades, watchtowers, stretching from coast to coast. His goal wasn't a dramatic battle. It was starvation, isolation. He denied Spartacus space to maneuver and, most crucially, denied him grain. With supply lines cut, the rebels began to wither. Horses died, metal ran short, hunger eroded morale. Spartacus tried to escape by striking a deal with Sicilian pirates, paying them an enormous sum for transport. But the pirates betrayed him, pocketed the money, and never returned with ships. The trap closed. Crassus pressed from the south, and Pompey the Great entered Italy from the north with fresh, victorious legions returning from Spain. Spartacus was crushed between hammer and anvil. He had one chance left: a breakout. In a violent storm, his rebels smashed through a weak spot in Crassus's fortifications with desperate diversion tactics. For a moment, they escaped, but they were exhausted, undersupplied, and cut off from resources. Delay meant annihilation between two converging Roman armies. So, Spartacus chose battle. He aimed straight at Crassus himself, hoping to shatter the command structure. Before the clash, he killed his own horse in front of his men. It was no theatrics, but a message: no retreat, only victory or death. He slammed into the Roman lines, cut down centurions, and fought his way through until he fell in close combat. His body was never found, adding to the legend. Rome answered his defiance with horror. Along the Appian Way, 6,000 captured rebels were crucified as a warning to every slave. Spartacus's long string of victories came from three things. He understood Roman methods and always chose terrain and timing to his advantage. He kept strict fairness and discipline in camp, cementing loyalty in a diverse army. And he made decisions faster than his enemies, imposing his own tempo on the war. But he lost when Rome forced him into their rules. His army grew too large for his logistics. Crassus's betrayal gave Rome time. Crassus confined his maneuvering, and Pompey closed the last door. At first, Spartacus dictated the rhythm of war. In the end, Rome did. So the question remains: what if the pirates had kept their word and Spartacus had escaped to Sicily?